In 1895, after years of experimentation and hypothesis, the first ever radio signal manages to be sent. At a distance of less than 2 kilometers, it manages to transmit a simple pulse, Morse code for the letter S. The world is changing in an instant. A radio signal means a wireless signal. Human makes electromagnetic waves alive, and a few years later, manages to send a message not for 2 kilometers, but more than 2,000 kilometers.
From a ground station nestled in the mountains at Andover, Maine, a signal is sent to a speeding satellite. An historic feat that could reshape man's future.
In 1920, the first radio broadcast is already taking place. But in addition to all this, something else changes from this first simple message. Unintentionally, without actually thinking about it, we send a signal into space. Each of these radio messages spreads in other directions, admittedly to a weaker degree. But still, the Earth is not airtight. The signal begins a journey through space that continues to this day.
Wait, hold on for a second. So if they are still traveling, where have they reached? Who could have picked them up?
It's a very good question. Let me explain. 120 light years is a huge distance, and from that time, these radio impulses made the distance even a little bigger than that. For us, this is something difficult to imagine. The light itself is the fastest thing in the universe. Making this distance takes 120 years, and our fastest cosmic vehicles would not be able to cross the same distance even in 120,000 years. This huge terrain stretches far, far beyond our solar system. For us, it is something beyond the range, but from the perspective of the universe, it is not even 3, but 1 point. Literally. On this graph, representing the Milky Way, the average galaxy, 100,000 light years of the way from Earth to the farthest point that reached our radio waves, the entire distance is within the point. Despite the fact that capturing these waves would be a very difficult thing, the chance that there is someone able to reach it in that distance is really small. To this day, we do not have any evidence that there is any civilization in the universe other than us. Only silence surrounds us. This is strange, because it all indicates that someone should be there. The size of the universe, the number of galaxies, stars, planets, and the circumstances favorable to the emergence of life are indicating that we are not alone in this vast universe. But we didn't find anyone yet. What do we do wrong? It may be that we forget something. For example, if these civilizations exist, and if they are there, but for some reason, they do not want us to know about it, and every signal that is captured is thrown away and forgotten. What if the aliens are afraid of us? Such a situation represents a hypothesis of a dark forest. Imagine that you wake up in the very middle of the dense jungle. There is a night and it surrounds you with absolute darkness. You do not know what kind of jungle it is and what you can meet in it. In this way, the universe is depicted in the hypothesis of the dark forest, which assumes that it is full of civilizations with the same dilemma. Communication with the aliens is risky because their real intentions are unknown. Therefore, it is better to sit quietly, or in a more pessimistic version of this hypothesis, attack the first one from surprise. The second option is particularly attractive when you are rapidly growing up into a space civilization, and suddenly you notice that the amount of natural resources is decreasing, and other civilizations are the same desperate to get them. Their gain means your loss, and you don't know if you can agree with them, and if you want it or not, attack becomes the least risky and the most rational decision. In fact, this decision is so rational that even mathematical, because the logic that the hypothesis of the dark forest leads to is exactly the same logic that one of the examples of so-called theory of the game is. The theory of the game is a field of mathematics that deals with the research of the most optimal strategies in the situations in which one rational person has to deal with other rational people. And one of these situations is the so-called dilemma of a prisoner. The subject of prison presents the following situation. You are a prisoner who is accused of something. In the same situation, your colleague is the second prisoner. And although the authorities have no evidence for your biggest charges, they are going to lock you up for some minor charges for which you will get 20 years in prison. It is a simple situation, but of course there is one catch. Being in separate rooms, without any communication, without the previous agreement, and so on, each of you gets a proposal. Confess, and you will go free. The entire sentence goes to the second prisoner, who will go to jail for 20 years. Now look what's going on. This wonderful situation works for you only if you confess, but the second prisoner decides to sit quietly. Then the whole guilt falls on him, and you get the best possible result. If he also gives you away, each of you will go to jail for 5 years. If none of you decides to talk, you both will be sentenced for 1 year in prison. You can easily notice that for your two as a whole, it would be the best to sit quietly. You will get the smallest sentence and there will be no risk. But this solution would require some communication, some information, or a 100% trust, which is also a kind of information. When you don't have these things, you don't know the intention of the other side. And in this situation, the most optimal and rational strategy for you is to defend yourself, the betrayal and confession. At least then, you protect yourself from this worst 20-year sentence you will get if you allow yourself to be attacked. And that is the problem. In space, communication can be difficult, not only because of the vast distances and delay, but also the fact that an alien civilization may communicate in a fundamentally different way. This uncertainty and the lack of trust drives us towards rational decisions. The best defense is to attack. Well, I guess that this attack is impractical though, without such a mundane reason as the fact that by the time our army reaches the distant galaxy, the opponent may have already moved on to another era of technology development. In other words, our AK-47s and M16s will meet the space tanks and weapons that we can't even imagine. In such a situation, the best what you could do as a distrust civilization is to avoid contact. The dark forest hypothesis is only the hypothesis. It is admittedly based on some rational arguments, for example, on the prediction of how a civilization may behave when it has incomplete information, but it relies also on certain assumptions because we also now have incomplete information. Scientist Stephen Jay Gould once said that he has enough problem in anticipating the reactions of his loved ones, let alone the behavior of extraterrestrial civilization, and you can't deny him a certain right. We are not able to predict with 100% certainty how alien life forms will behave, especially considering how different they may be, whether due to nature or technological development. Admittedly, the dark forest hypothesis allows the existence of diverse civilizations, but simply assumes that under certain conditions, when different life forms compete for resources and are unable to communicate, this diversity will decrease, but trusting civilizations, as in the prisoner's dilemma, will fall prey to the distrustful ones, those that attack first, those that want to dominate. Well, of course, we want to believe that the cosmos is inhabited by civilizations friendly and willing to cooperate. It may be so. Anyway, if alien civilizations exist, then they might as well be afraid of other, as they might just not be interested in contact or the cosmos at all. What if aliens procrastinate? Imagine that some community is just fulfilled. For example, if we were immortal or could simulate any meaningful experience in some virtual, that would we then also be drawn to the stars? Maybe we would found that someday that it would be cool to visit the cosmos, but someday. Because right now, we don't have to. The motivation of an alien civilization is very difficult to predict, but it is easy to imagine that even if the inhabitants of the universe, including us, were not interested in war, some seed of uncertainty, anxiety, and perhaps even distrust could push us to take a careful step. Astronomer Carl Sagan said that in space we are children, so we should patiently listen before we start shouting. Expectation of good and kind is in a way inscribed in our character because what, for example, is fear of the darkness? What if not fear of the lack of information? Fear of the unknown. Just as the ocean used to be, today the cosmos is the greatest mystery, and looking at ourselves and the animals on Earth being a bit shy generally pays off. It is better to be frightened by something that isn't there than not to be frightened by something that is. Space causes different emotions. Not only anxiety, it can also delight, and that delight so huge that it changes our way of thinking. This is how scientists and astronauts describe the so-called overview effect, also called cosmic euphoria. In some people taking their first flight into space, there is a strong feeling of change in sensitivity, or even views of the surrounding world. Seeing our planet as a whole, as an element placed in the blackness of space, pushes the earthly further into the background and gives impressions of unity. Who knows whether alien civilizations also did not reach such a state? At some point, finally, to be able to continue to develop, you have to put aside suspicions, come out of the dark forest, and create something more. Even we ourselves have come a long way despite active disputes, awkwardly strives to create a greater whole. Even if the cosmos for some reason would turn out empty, because maybe the occurrence of life, or the occurrence of intelligence at all, is not so obvious, it remains to believe humanity will not want it to inhabit, as it were hidden in the forest tribe, in separation and conflict, but as a whole, which together is able to achieve more.